Hi, I'm Glenn McGovern, an aviation attorney and pilot with Instrument and Commercial Ratings. We're here today to discuss Part 830 of the Ntsb rules. We'll discuss what is a Ntsb-defined accident and what is a mere incident which need not be reported. We'll discuss FAA enforcement ramifications when a pilot has become involved in an aviation accident, and we'll also discuss a competency check ride or re-examination that he may face under Section 609 of the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. We'll also discuss the insurance aspects of when you're involved in an accident, and we'll discuss with an experienced aviation adjuster what actions you should take. There may be 3 repercussions from a pilot reporting an accident to the Ntsb. First thing is that the FAA may open up an investigation against the pilot. The FAA would then send an initial letter of investigation to the pilot, notifying him or her that he is under investigation by the FAA. This may be followed by the FAA issuing a proposed order of suspension to suspend the pilot's license. The second is a possible civil penalty enforcement action by the FAA against the pilot. The third is a possible re-examination of the airman by the FAA under Section 609 of the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. The FAA has the right to re-examine an airman if it has reasonable grounds to do so. This may include a competency check ride or a medical re-examination of the airman. We'll discuss in detail Part 830 of the Ntsb rules, and we'll point out that the rules do not require you to report an aviation accident to the FAA, but in certain instances, they require you to report the accident to the Ntsb. But if you do report an accident to the Ntsb, it will no doubt be investigated by the local FAA, who usually investigate small general aviation accidents. The FAA office will then assign an investigator to investigate the general aviation accident. The aviation investigator, or the FAA inspector, will then wear 2 hats. That of an Ntsb safety investigator looking for safety violations, and that of an FAA inspector looking for FAR violations. For this reason, it's important that you only report aviation accidents which you are required to report under Part 830 of the Ntsb rules. Another possible occurrence is a re-examination of the pilot by the FAA. The FAA has the power to re-examine any airman at any time under Section 609 of the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. This power to re-examine an airman is only limited by the FAA having reasonable grounds to question the pilot's competency. Any circumstance that reasonably raises the grounds of whether the pilot is competent may be used by the FAA. 609 of the Federal Aviation Act of 1958, the administrator may from time to time re-inspect or re-examine any airman if, as a result of any re-inspection or re-examination, or if, as a result of any other investigation made by the administrator, he determines that the safety in air commerce or air transportation of the public interest requires, the administrator may issue an order amending, modifying, suspending, or revoking all or in part any type certificates, airworthiness certificates, or air certificates. The FAA inspector will then send a certified mail letter to the pilot briefly describing the aviation incident and why it's necessary to re-examine the pilot. Then the FAA will give the pilot 10 days to respond to the certified letter to set up a re-examination of the pilot. The letter will also state what areas the FAA feels it is necessary to conduct a re-examination of the pilot. It's not uncommon for pilots to get instruction and even dual time before they undergo a re-examination. Then, if the pilot passes the re-examination, that's the end of the pilot re-examination process. If the pilot refuses to take the examination, then the FAA inspector will forward the file to the closest regional attorney's office of the FAA, who will take action to suspend the pilot certificate until he takes the pilot re-examination. The pilot can then appeal to the Ntsb if he wishes to do so. Other Ntsb cases in which pilots have been made to undergo a re-examination include a pilot being involved in a FAR violation, a pilot being involved in an aviation accident, a pilot who undergoes partial re-examination because of an incident and then flunks the check ride so badly that they call him back to re-examine on all his other certificates or ratings, a CFI who sends a student for a check ride with totally incomplete logbook entries, or a totally incompetent student pilot and landing at the wrong airport. The FAA has generally been pretty fair in administering these pilot re-examinations. Most pilots study, get instruction, and pass. Very few fail. They're given the opportunity to take the check ride again. But there is a word of caution here. The FAA takes the position that just because a pilot is re-examined and passes the check ride, that does not stop the FAA from pursuing further enforcement action by way of a civil penalty or a suspension. Another thing I want to discuss at this point is the NASA Safety Reporting Program. We discussed the NASA Safety Reporting Program and NASA Form 277 in the first videotape, the Conductor General of FAA. We discussed it in detail. But here, when we're talking about accidents, I want to point out some things. The NASA Safety Reporting Program, which if a pilot files a form within 10 days from an incident, will normally give him immunity, will not help when the pilot is involved in an accident. If a pilot is involved in an NTSB-defined accident, under the rules of the Safety Reporting Program, it will not give the pilot immunity. Also, if there's a question of pilot competency, the NASA 277 form will not give the pilot immunity. Now at this point, let's talk in detail about Part 830 of the NTSB rules. Part 830 is not a FAR. If you do not report an NTSB-defined accident as required by Part 830, it cannot be held against you as a FAR violation. However, Part 830 of the NTSB rules does provide for civil penalties for failure to properly report an NTSB-defined accident. First, let's talk about NTSB Rule 830.2, which defines what is an aviation accident. Aviation accident means an occurrence associated with the operation of an aircraft which takes place between the time any person boards the aircraft with the intention of flight and all such persons have disembarked, in which any person suffers death or serious injury, or in which the aircraft sustains substantial damage. Let's look at the time requirement for an aviation accident. The NTSB defines an aviation accident as occurring between the time when an aircraft is operated and the persons enter the aircraft until the time that they disembark from that aircraft. For example, a person, whether a pilot or a crew member or passenger, who disembarks from an aircraft at the end of a flight and falls down the stairs, say for example rupturing a disc in his lower back, which requires hospitalization for more than 7 days, would be an NTSB-defined accident, which would have to be reported to the FAA. The other requirement is that the person involved in the accident must board the aircraft with the intention of flight. In other words, for example, a mechanic attempts a high-speed taxi test on an aircraft, runs and loses control of the aircraft, damaging parts of that aircraft. This would not be an NTSB-defined accident since there was no intention of flight, but was merely a high-speed taxi test. Also, note another requirement is if any person suffers death or serious injury. A fatal injury is defined under Part 830.2 as meaning any injury which results in death within 30 days of the accident. Serious injury means any injury which requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours commencing within 7 days from date the injury was received, results in a fracture of any bone except simple fractures of fingers, toes, or nose, causes severe hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage, involves any internal organ, or involves second-degree or third-degree burns, or any burns affecting more than 5% of the body surface. For example, if a person is injured in an aircraft incident, goes to an emergency room, and then leaves after a few hours, all within 7 days from date of the injury, has various minor bruises and simple fractures of his fingers, toes, and his nose, this is not an NTSB-defined serious injury and does not require reporting of the incident to the NTSB. All these definitions are important in that they determine whether you have to report the incident to the NTSB or not. For example, say an unfortunate person walks into an aircraft propeller as the aircraft is being worked on. This would not be an NTSB-defined accident since it did not take place between the time that the persons boarded the aircraft with the intention of flight and disembarked, and since there was no intention of flight. Next, let's talk about what type of aircraft damage makes the incident an accident and requires it to be reported to the NTSB. Substantial damage means damage or failure which adversely affects the structural strength, performance, or flight characteristics of the aircraft, which would normally require major repair or replacement of the affected component. Engine failure or damage limited to an engine if only one engine fails or is damaged, bent fairings, cowling, dented skin, small puncture holes in the skin or fabric, ground damage to rotor or propeller blades, damage to landing gear, wheels, tires, flaps, engine accessories, brakes, or wingtips are not considered substantial damage for the purposes of this part. Let's take a look at what is and what is not substantial damage under the NTSB rules, and therefore what damage requires the reporting to the NTSB. Failure of one engine in a multi-engine aircraft is not an accident which has to be reported under NTSB 830.2. An airplane which ground loops, for example, sustains bent fairings, cowling damage, dented skin, small puncture holes in the skin of fabric, damage to landing gear, ground damage to rotor or propeller blades, damage to wheels, damage to tires, damage to flaps, damage to engine accessories, damage to brakes, damage to wingtips are all not substantial damage under Part 830.2. If a pilot lands with the gear up, the question then arises as to whether this is an accident or an incident. It is suggested that the services of a mechanic be obtained to see whether there is substantial damage. Many gear-up landings of aircraft involve only bent propellers, damage to the landing gear and underbelly of the aircraft, unless there is substantial damage involved. As defined under Section 830.2, the incident need not be reported to the NTSB. The operator of an aircraft shall immediately and by most expeditious means available notify the nearest NTSB field office when an aircraft accident or incidents occur. Part 830.5 requires you to contact the local NTSB field office by the most expeditious means available, which includes telephone or telegram when an NTSB-defined aircraft accident or a listed incident occurs as set out in 830.2. This is different from filing a written report. A written report is only required if requested by an authorized representative of the board. NTSB safety boards are listed in the U.S. government telephone directories and are located in the following cities as shown: Anchorage, Alaska, Atlanta, Georgia, Chicago, Illinois, Denver, Colorado, Fort Worth, Texas, Kansas City, Missouri, Los Angeles, California, Miami, Florida, New York, New York, Seattle, Washington. Part 830.5 requires notification of an aircraft accident or any of the following incidents: flight control system malfunction or failure, inability of any required flight crew member to perform his normal flight duties as a result of injury or ailment, failure of structural components of a turbine engine excluding compressor and turbine blades and vanes, in-flight fire, or aircraft which collide in flight, damage to property other than the aircraft estimated to exceed $25,000 for repairs, including material and labor for a fair market value in the event of a total loss, whichever is less. For large multi-engine aircraft, more than 12,500 pounds maximum certified takeoff weight, in-flight failure of electrical systems which requires the sustained use of an emergency bus powered by a backup source, such as a battery auxiliary power unit or air-driven generator to retain flight control or a central instrument, in-flight failure of hydraulic systems that result in sustained reliance on a sole remaining hydraulic or mechanical system for movement of flight control surfaces, sustained loss of power or thrust produced by two or more engines, and an evacuation of an aircraft in which an emergency egress system is utilized. Part 830.5 also requires immediate notification if an aircraft is overdue and believed to have been involved in an accident. Part 830.6 of the NTSB rules state what information need be given: type, nationality, and registration marks of the aircraft, the name of the owner and operator of the aircraft, the name of the pilot in command, the date and time of the accident, the last point of departure and point of intended landing of the aircraft, the position of the aircraft with reference to some easily defined geographical points, the number of persons aboard, number killed and number seriously injured, nature of the accident, the weather and extent of the damage to the aircraft so far as it is known, a description of any explosives, radioactive materials, or other dangerous articles carried. Part 830.15 sets out what reports and statements are to be filed. Reports: the operator of an aircraft shall file a report or board form 6120.1 or board form 7120.2 within 10 days after an accident, or after 7 days if an overdue aircraft is still missing. A report or an incident for which notification is required by Part 830.15a shall be filed only as requested by an authorized representative of the board. Part 830.15b provides for crew members' statements. Each crew member, if physically able at the time the report is submitted, shall attach the statement setting forth the facts, conditions, and circumstances relating to the accident or incident as they appear to him. If the crew member is incapacitated, he should submit the statement as soon as he is physically able. It is important to note that your aviation attorney should review any statement you prepare before you submit it to the NTSB. It is also wise to consult with an aviation attorney before filing a report and notifying the NTSB, since this will no doubt lead to a possible FAA enforcement action. The operator of a public aircraft other than an aircraft for the Armed Forces or Intelligence Agency shall file a report on NTSB Form 6120.1 within 10 days after an accident or incident listed in Section 830.5a. The operator shall file a report with the field office nearest the accident or incident. Let's also mention Part 830.10, which provides for preservation of aircraft records, mail, cargo, and other records. Section 830A provides the operator of an aircraft involved in an accident or incident in which notification must be given is responsible for preserving, to the extent possible, any aircraft records, cargo, and mail aboard the aircraft, and all records, including all recorded mediums of flight, maintenance, and voice recorders pertaining to the operation and maintenance of the aircraft until the board takes custody thereof or release is granted pursuant to Section 830.12b. Section 830.10b provides that prior to the time the board or its authorized representative takes custody of aircraft records, mail, or cargo, such records, mail, or cargo may not be disturbed or moved except to the extent necessary to remove persons injured or trapped, to protect the records from further damage, or to protect the public from injury. Section 830.10c provides when it is necessary to remove aircraft records, mail, or cargo, sketches, description, notes, and photographs shall be made, if possible, of the original position and condition of the wreckage and any significant impact marks. Section 830.10d provides the operator of an aircraft involved in an accident or incident shall retain all records, reports, internal documents, and memoranda dealing with the accident or incident until authorized by the board to the contrary. Usually the records or mail, cargo, or records will not be released until an authorized representative has determined the board has no need for the same. When an aviation accident occurs, it's an extremely stressful time for the pilot. People may have been injured, property may have been damaged. Usually an aviation claim needs to be filed with an aviation insurance carrier. Statements need to be given to the claims carrier. And yet, in this extremely psychologically stressful time, a pilot's actions are crucial. A pilot needs to take the right actions at this time in order to protect his pilot's license and his career. I'm here now with Chris Burnett, an experienced aviation insurance adjuster of Dale L. Burnett and Associates in New Orleans. I'd like to talk about the aviation aspects of an accident dealing with insurance. Chris, would you tell me what a pilot can expect after he's been involved in an aviation accident and what a claims adjuster does in an aviation accident?
Yes, Glenn. Following the accident and after the pilot's reported the accident to the FAA, if he's required to do so, he should immediately contact his insurance agent so the agent can report the accident to the insurance company, and the insurance company can assign an adjuster, either an in-house adjuster or an independent like myself. At that point, the adjuster will contact the insured and make whatever arrangements are necessary to investigate the loss and to get whatever documentation is required from the insured, and also to inspect the aircraft.
Okay, and what is the aviation adjuster looking for when he inspects the aircraft?
In most instances, if it's an in-flight accident, the adjuster is going to be looking to document the airworthiness of the aircraft and the pilot's qualifications in order to confirm that coverage is in order so that the insurance company can process payment of the claim.
Okay, so it's really important for the pilot to make sure that aircraft is airworthy, or what would happen if the aircraft, if it's out of annual or there's some other defect in the airworthiness or an unauthorized modification that's not documented?
Every aviation policy that you will see requires that the aircraft be operated in accordance with its airworthiness certificate, which means it must have an annual inspection or whatever other inspections are required for the operation of the aircraft. It's essential that the pilot, the insured on the policy, maintain the aircraft.
And in other words, if he doesn't have something, if it's out of annual, perhaps, depending on the policy, or he's made a modification without an STC, so it's unairworthy, that would be legal grounds for denying coverage under that policy.
If the aircraft is out of annual, if it's not airworthy at the time of the accident, he is risking a coverage denial by the insurance company.
And what about modifications and everything? Same thing holds for that if the modification isn't authorized or properly documented?
Correct. If it's not authorized by the FAA in accordance with FARs, then it's not technically maintained in accordance with its airworthiness certification.
Okay. And then you mentioned about the pilot's qualifications. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. The most insurance policies require that the pilot be, have a certain type of certificate, either private, commercial, ATP, whatever is required for the operation of the aircraft, either in business and pleasure or in a commercial use situation. So the pilot must be qualified. He must have a certificate that authorizes him to fly the aircraft for the purpose he's using it for, and he's got to have a valid medical certificate. He's got to have a valid biennial flight review. All of these things need to be documented at the time of a loss.
So in other words, let me summarize this if I can. If he doesn't have a valid medical, or he doesn't have one of the other requirements or rated for that aircraft, a sign-off for a retractable gear aircraft, that may be grounds for denial of his insurance claim?
Correct.
Okay. Another thing is, while we're talking about aviation policies, could you tell me something about aviation policies? I mean, are they all different, or?
The basic wording for aircraft policies is fairly standard throughout the industry. Some markets have different conditions in their policies, but primarily they're all the same.
Okay.
As far as requirements, as far as keeping the aircraft maintained and the pilot qualified, they're all identical.
Okay. Okay. Is it important for a pilot to read his policy before he has an accident, know exactly what the terms and conditions are?
Yes, absolutely. I would urge anybody who has any insurance policy to read it.
Okay.
In order to know what to do in case of a loss.
This is a concern, a question I get asked all the time from pilots involved in incidents. They're involved in an incident which is not an accident under Part 830. It's not technically an accident. It has to be reported to the Ntsb. If a pilot reports a claim that arises out of an incident where there's not substantial damage, for example, to the aircraft, will that aviation insurance company or adjuster, will any report be made of that to the FAA?
Generally, no. The FAA doesn't ask insurance companies or adjusters to make any reports to them. This is strictly something that needs to be handled. If it's an accident that needs to be reported, it's strictly between the pilot and the FAA to take care of that communication.
Okay. Frequently, in a case of an accident with substantial damage, you're going to want to take the pilot's statement. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you go about doing this normally? Do you do this over the phone or what?
It can be done either way. Usually, if it's a serious accident that involves substantial damage to the aircraft, the adjuster will go to the site and also meet with the pilot and take usually a recorded statement from him. In certain circumstances, if the pilot has already given, say, a written statement to the FAA, that will suffice for the adjuster as well.
Okay. Does the pilot generally have a duty to give a statement to the aviation insurance company under its policy?
Most policies have what they call a cooperation clause, which means that the insured will cooperate with the insurance company in the investigation of the claim and in making sure that the property is protected after a loss occurs. For example, if the aircraft has to be left out overnight in a field where it's subject to vandalism or pilferage by somebody who's going to, say, steal the avionics, the insured has a responsibility to protect the aircraft in whatever form that may take.
Okay, so he's got a duty to mitigate damages, take immediate steps to preserve that property so they don't steal the avionics out, for example, or whatever.
Correct. So you can usually do that by way of the sheriff's department. Ask them to post a guard overnight with the aircraft.
I hear this all the time from pilots. It's kind of a myth that goes around. Maybe you could answer it while we're talking. a TBO of an engine. What effect does that have on your policy coverage if you fly an aircraft past the engine TBO recommended by the manufacturer? Does that have any effect at all, or?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
I've never been involved in a claim where the insurance company denies coverage because the engine is past TBO. And I'm not sure that the FAA considers the aircraft unairworthy if it's past the TBO. I think the TBO is strictly a recommended time by the manufacturer that you have the engine overhauled.
Okay. How do you handle a claim? Do you go out there to verify the damage or take pictures, or do you require the pilot to furnish pictures of proof? How is that handled normally?
We'll do it both ways depending upon the severity of the accident. If it is a substantial damage to the aircraft or a total loss of the aircraft, generally the adjuster will inspect the damage on the scene. Or if the wreck has been removed to another location, the adjuster will actually put eyeballs on it and take some photographs of it. If it's lesser damage, in order to save expenses for the insurance company, we may ask the insured or the pilot to help us document it by way of photographs and logbook entries, etc.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for talking with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
That completes our review of Part 830 of the NTSB rules. I hope it's been of benefit to you. I'm Glenn McGovern, saying may your next flight be your best ever. Goodbye and so long.